1. Growing up, I was raised by a single father, since my mother had a lot of mental health issues, and she eventually left us, living in a rather decently sized city, in a less than moderate downtown apartment. My father, a young man who was practically a workaholic in order to support himself, as well as keep both of us in decent housing, would usually bring me to a nearby family member to watch over me while he was at work. At the time of this occurrence, I was about 7, and still didn't understand how to take care of myself at home while my father was at work. In other words, I struggled to make microwavable popcorn. Yeah, I was one of those kids. It was the weekend, and my father was heading to one of his 2 jobs. Thus, he was going to bring me to an aunt's home, which was a few blocks down. We usually walked, considering my father's job, as well as my aunt's home wasn't too far away, and we couldn't afford a car. Let's focus on what happened. Don't remember the specific date. I think it was early summer, Saturday, around 7 p.m. I'm in my Scooby-Doo pajamas, happily awaiting my sleepover with my wonderful auntie, and my father is getting ready to leave. I grab a movie to watch at my aunt's house, probably Blue's Clues or Scooby-Doo or something similar. We leave our room, lock up the apartment, and head out onto the sidewalk. Immediately after walking out, I notice there is a man leaning against the outer building next to the door. He is smoking a cigarette and just casually standing there. He was wearing a baseball cap, but that is really all I remember about him. We began walking down the road in the direction of my aunt's. We get about 5 feet when he says, "Hey kid, cute pajamas." My father gripped my hand a little tighter and pulls me a tad forward, forcing me to keep stride. I was about to turn my head to look at the man, but my father must have noticed because he told me to just keep walking. We make it to the edge of the sidewalk and have to wait for the light to change when I hear him again. "Hey kid, what you got there?" I felt my father's hand get super tense. He leaned down and picked me up, basically making sure I wouldn't leave his side. The man repeated again, "What you got there? I love Scooby-Doo." He then proceeded to make a harsh laughing sound in the voice of Scooby. You know, the high-pitched "ree" sort of laugh. I dug my face into my father because I was scared. It was then, after I was done burying my face into my father's shoulder, that I saw the man a little clearer. He had what looked like pimples or scabs all over his face, a baseball cap showing most of his forehead and eyes, and a very large smile. Although I believe I remember him having what seemed like a scarred lip, or a cleft lip. I'm not sure. But I know there was something weird about his lips. I noticed only because of his enormous and awkward smile. It was after the light turned and allowed for us to continue walking across the street that the man reached out and brushed my hair. I recoiled away from him and dug my face into my father's shoulder once more. My dad noticed this and swung around yelling at the man to get his fucking hands off of his son. He said some more things, most of which was language he didn't usually say around me. I was terrified. The man slowly backed off. His hands held up, smile still plastered onto his face. Still holding me, my father quickly walks across the road and gets onto the other side. I looked up and the man was still standing there, smile on his face. After we had gotten to be what seemed like a safe distance, my father asked if he could put me down, and we began to walk hand in hand again. We get about a block away from my aunt's home when, amongst the usual sounds of traffic, I began to hear quick and heavy footsteps behind us. My father must have heard it too, because he took me by the shoulder and moved us both towards the buildings. From my understanding now, he must have believed it to just be a jogger out on the town. However, when I looked back, it was the man again, smile on his face, hat covering his eyes. "Hey, you never told me what you got there, kiddo." My father had had enough. He turned around, keeping me away from the man with a hand on my chest, and began to yell. I had never really heard my father yell. He is a smaller guy, about 5'9", but he is rather burly and built due to him being a diesel mechanic. The sound of his deep voice made me recoil and become even more worried. After using more profane language and telling the man to get lost, the man once more began talking. I just love Scooby-Doo, man. I want to see if I could try on his PJs. That was what did it. My father clenched up and laid the man out. No other words said, one punch and the man was down. Once my father saw that he wasn't getting up, he picked me up and basically ran the rest of the way to my aunt's home. He set me down, explained to her what had happened, and called the police, telling them there was a confrontation. I remember there being at least 2 cars with flashing lights that pulled up. But when I asked my dad about this story before writing this, he claims that they never updated him on whether they found the man or not. Needless to say, I still ended up staying at my aunt's place for a couple of days. I just remember that night, probably along with the following week, being absolutely terrified and spooked. We eventually ended up moving out of there, and my father ended up marrying another woman. We moved into a quiet town where not a lot happens, and I am now in college. But after reading the famous Smiling Man story on here, it triggered this story in my memory, and I had to go ask my father about the blunt details of what happened that night. I'm gonna sleep with my lights on tonight. A scabbed up, probably now concave-skulled creepy-ass man who wanted to try on my PJs. Let's never meet again. 2. I attend one unnamed university with my girlfriend and our friends Ivy and Bruce. We were freshmen at the time when this started happening. One day, me and my girlfriend saw Ivy talking with another student. He was talking to her like they knew each other for years and treated us the same way when Ivy got closer to us. I was happy to meet another guy and started talking to him, but Ivy insisted that we have class soon and have to go. When we got away, she told us that that guy's name was David, and he just casually started talking to her when she was waiting on us, asking some weird questions, and when she tried to go away, he followed her. Next day, me and Bruce met this David during class together. He saw me and sat next to us. He started to ask me personal questions about Ivy. That's when my spider senses started to tingle. I told him some fake info and tried to change the subject. When the class ended, I quickly picked Bruce up and got away as quickly as I could. A few days passed and Ivy told us that David added her on Facebook and was sending her messages the whole day. It didn't take long before he added me and my girlfriend. She immediately blocked him, and I wanted to find out his motive, so I added him back. I expected him to send me hundreds of messages as he did with Ivy, but he only texted me a few times, and every time he wanted something from me. Notes from the class, program codes from another class, or just wanted to know my favorite food. It became routine for him to always find us in our shared classes, and was even walking with us on our way from the school. This was pretty creepy because he was just walking silently next to us. Halfway, me, my girlfriend, and Bruce went one way and Ivy another. This time, he always went with Ivy. She later told us that he sometimes talked to her, and almost got on the same bus as she did, even though he lives elsewhere. This happened during the first semester. Me and Bruce later found out that if Ivy is not with us, and I separated from Bruce and my girlfriend, he always follows me. Once he followed us to the dorms, where he was caught and kicked out. In an attempt to get rid of him, me and Bruce convinced him that Bruce and Ivy are in a relationship. But that made things even worse. During the classes, he started to force himself between us and tried to visibly convince Bruce and Ivy to break up. Next semester was pretty much the same. He somehow had the same schedule as we did, and tried even more to fit between us. He started to have the same hobbies as we did, played the same games as we did, and so on. Then he disappeared. He was gone for pretty much the whole semester. Fast forward to this October. We were happy to have peace, but David appeared once again. He was a freshman again. Now I finally get to the creepiest encounter I had with David or anyone in my whole life. It started on the last class of the week. I had my things packed and planned to go right to the railway station after the class. About 10 minutes before the end, a message from David popped up. "Are you in the class?" I ignored it. Then another message. Not a message, but a photo. Photo of me sitting in the class by the window taken from the corridor through the window. I froze at that moment. I knew people could see into this classroom, but never realized people could stalk you like this. I was thinking how many times he did this and to how many people he did this. Another message came, but I didn't read it. I didn't turn. I knew he was there, for some reason. When the class ended, I grabbed my things and got going. I dodged the corridor he was probably standing, but when I get one floor down, he was there. I ignored him and kept going down. I was out of the school when he appeared behind me and started to talk to me. He asked me where am I going. I told him I'm going home. He looked at me with a sinister smile and said that he has the same way. I never told him where I live, and he couldn't find that on Facebook. I got to the train station with him following me and bought tickets for my train. He didn't buy any, but kept going with me to my train and even inside the train. I insisted that he didn't have to, but he always said that he's going the same way. When I asked him why he hadn't bought a ticket, he answered that he'll buy one later. We were in the coupe alone. He drew the curtains. I felt like this was it. Whatever he wanted from me, he'll do it now. I knew I could beat him, but I had my bags in my hands and couldn't protect myself. He turned to me, still smiling. I dropped the bags and get ready for anything. He was looking for something in his pocket. At that moment, some random girl opened the door, asking if there's a free spot. David turned, nodded, and walked outside calmly, saying, "Bye," to me. The girl looked at me, but I just smiled, picked my bags, and freed some space for her. I haven't met David ever since, but we found out that he started stalking some new girls. We decided to fight back against him, and met the girls this week. I hope it's not too late. 3. I'd like to preface this by saying that not all mental health professionals are terrible people. Good doctors and medication have saved my life. I also didn't grow up in the US, so if you see something in this story that makes you go, "That's not how that works," keep in mind that other countries might have different laws. Furthermore, this describes my experiences with staying at a mental hospital, so prepare for triggers. Alright. Here we go. I was a troubled kid. I'm kind of a troubled person in general, but when I was in my early teens, specifically in this story I was 14, I was cutting, suicidal, and refusing to go to school. So I was put on a waiting list for a children's mental hospital. I know now the fact that I was on that waiting list for close to half a year should have been the first warning sign. At the time I enjoyed being on sick leave from school, which basically meant I got to play The Sims until 6 in the morning for 5 months straight. But when I had to pack my stuff to actually go to the hospital, I, of course, didn't really want to go. I wanted to get help, don't get me wrong, but the idea of being away from home for 6 weeks, which is the standard time they take to analyze and watch you to get you a diagnosis, after which you can choose to pursue treatment, scared me. I arrived at the hospital in tears, my mom carrying my suitcase for me. The nurses noticed that obviously I didn't want to stay. "Are you here of your own free will?" I shook my head. They just shrugged it off, saying they could get a judicial decision forcing me to stay here. I never go talk to a judge. I never got to defend or explain myself, and as far as I know, my parents didn't talk to a judge either. A judge glossed over my medical history and then signed a piece of paper that forced me to stay in this hellhole for 6 weeks. The contents of my suitcase were searched, and I remember feeling like I had just arrived in prison. The first terrifying thing happened on my first night. As a cutter, my arms were in horrific shape. When wounds heal, they itch. I scratched open some of my old scabs, and when I went to the nurse to ask for a bandage, everyone went nuts. In their eyes, I had purposely harmed myself, which they couldn't prove, but okay. So what do you do when a 14-year-old mental patient harms herself? Talk to her? Try to help? Nah. You take away all her jewelry, a necklace from my mom and a bracelet from my ex-girlfriend, who at the time I still had very strong feelings for, and sent her off to the timeout room for 24 hours. The timeout room was a small room with a big window that could just barely fit a bed. If I had to use the bathroom, I had to ask a nurse to accompany me, and no joke. At one point I was in the bathroom with a nurse standing guard in front of the door. She asked if I was doing okay, and I sarcastically responded with, "No, I'm cutting myself with the toilet paper." She goes, "Really?" and rips open the door. Fucking Christ. All of my clothes, including underwear and PJs, were taken from my room and kept in the front office for the time I stayed in the timeout room. So whenever I needed clothes, I had to go up to the front office to ask for them. But apart from having to ask for clothes and bathroom trips, I was completely left alone in that room. No one ever came to check on me. Getting out of the timeout room wasn't a lot better. For the first week or two, I had horrible stomach problems. I would get up multiple times a night to use the bathroom, which, by the way, you didn't have one in your room. You had to walk down the hall to the bathrooms. Because my stomach kept me up all night, I would often not get enough sleep and end up sleeping through the day, which led to me not taking part in group activities. And instead of, waking me up, I was bitched at that, and I quote, "If I was up all night roaming the halls, I'd be tired too. What, do you want me to just shit the bed, or..." And because I didn't partake in group activities, I couldn't earn outside time. Yes, I had to earn going outside. Even just sitting on the front steps with a nurse right next to me had to be earned. So for the first 6 weeks, I was effectively locked up, except for school and weekends, where I was allowed to go home. It was blatantly obvious that none of the nurses really cared about any of the patients. They weren't even real nurses, they were more like prison guards. One of them straight up looked like a homeless guy. Another sounded like she'd been a 5-packs-a-day smoker all her life. And I mean all of them, were chain smokers. Every free second they had, they'd use for smoke breaks. Right outside the door too, with the doors open, so that all the other kids who were currently going through nicotine withdrawals could smell the cigarette smoke. I saw a real nurse once a week. She mainly checked for self-harm. One time I self-harmed at home over the weekend. I told her my pet bunny did it, and she believed me. Within 6 weeks of me staying at the mental hospital, I saw a psychiatrist a whopping 2 times. Once for a general introduction, and once for an IQ test. Oh, and did I mention that you aren't allowed to have a razor in the shower? Or the huge bird spider that sat in the corner of one of the showers for the entire time I stayed there? Or the cobwebs and silver fish that were everywhere? Anyone who's ever struggled with mental illness knows that sentences like "just pull yourself together" or "get over it" are the least helpful things one could say to a mentally ill person. I've never heard it that much in my entire life. There was one instance where another patient, who was deadly afraid of spiders, came running out of her room in a borderline panic attack because she had woken up to a spider directly in front of her face. Know what they told her? "Don't be such a baby, it's just a spider." They gave her a broom and told her to get rid of the spider herself, which obviously she couldn't do. My roommate and I ended up helping her. Both of us were scared of spiders as well, mind you. But possibly the most outrageous thing happened on my second to last day. Someone had told the guards that I had smuggled in a razor blade, so they pulled me out of breakfast and searched my body from top to bottom, stripping me naked, with the door to the nurse's room wide open. When they didn't find a razor blade on me, they tore apart my room. They didn't find one there either, but found one laying on the floor in the hallway. It was even still in its wrapper. I wasn't the only patient who cut herself. As a matter of fact, I don't think there was a single female patient who didn't cut herself. That blade could have belonged to anyone. They had no proof it was mine. But of course, it was deemed that it was mine. And despite me not having any new cuts on my arm, I was thrown into the timeout room for another 24 hours. Literally my last 24 hours. And they paid so little attention to the timeout room that a fellow inmate was able to slip a letter with a razor blade inside under the door so I could take out my frustrations on myself. In case you were wondering where my parents were in all of this, my mother wanted to get me out of that place as soon as she heard about the timeout room. But since my parents had joint custody, she needed my father to agree to it. My father deserves a let's not meet story for himself. But to make it short, he hadn't talked to me in over 4 years, but was somehow convinced that I needed help and refused to get me out of there. My final diagnosis from that place? Narcissistic neurosis. I was 14. And to this day I have no idea how they came up with any kind of diagnosis, considering I had seen an actual doctor a total of 2 times. Additionally, this result was delivered to us, my parents and I, by the head doctor of the hospital, who I had never seen in my life, during a conclusive meeting on my last day. I was offered to stay and start behavioral therapy, but I guess it goes without saying that I politely declined that offer. Every therapist and psychiatrist I have talked to since, and trust me, there's been a few over the last 7 years, have disregarded that diagnosis entirely. Some have even laughed at it. I'm currently diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, and a panic disorder. And my current psychiatrist has suggested I might suffer from borderline personality disorder. I guess the moral of this story is to always research on the hospital you plan on getting yourself admitted to. I sure as shit hope I never have to see any of the guards, nurses, or doctors ever again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 282. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Also want to say thanks to all you guys for the wonderful comments you left on yesterday's video. I'm glad you liked it. I've actually already got enough stories to do another one, so I may do that next Sunday, or I might do, well, let me think. I might actually take a break from subscriber stories on Tuesday, and possibly I'll do either Revenge or Retail or Hotel on Tuesday this week, and then we'll do one of the other ones on Sunday. I think that might work. Yeah, okay. So with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.